Hi everyone, today we're going to be going over some really heavy subjects, and due to this I will have to censor my language. With that said, I want to give a trigger warning right out of the gate that this video will be talking about rape and sexual assault, in both the context of real life and fictional works, as well as just generally disturbing themes. So if you are under the age of 18, please click off this video right now. I have other videos on this channel that are appropriate for all ages, so I'd recommend that you go watch that instead. My YouTube channel doesn't normally cover these kinds of topics. This is a one-off video, but a very necessary one. I also want to say that I was mechanically raped on more than one occasion as a child, so if anyone has a say in this matter, it would be me. If you make any insensitive comments, I will delete them as I want my comments to be a safe place. Likewise, don't harass anyone mentioned in this video. My intent on making this video is to inform people on this content creator's actions, not to start a witch hunt. If my tone sounds odd in this video, it's not on purpose. This is just something really hard to talk about. Now without further ado, let's get into the video. Vivziepop, also known as Vivian Medrano, is a woman who has created shows like Hell of a Boss and Hazbin Hotel. Both shows of which reflect poorly on her character when it comes to the subject matter of rape and sexual assault, which we will get into later in the video, but right now we're going to go over her posts on social media to get a taste of her as a person. For context, Vivziepop has a storyboard artist named Raphael, who has a quote-unquote rape fetish. Essentially, he gets off to fantasizing about rape and depicting it in artworks in a sexually glorified manner, rather than the traumatizing thing that it actually is. Raph, as we'll see going further into this video, is not a survivor of rape or sexual assault. But Vivziepop would want you to believe otherwise in order for her to be shielded from criticism. Quote, "If you support SA survivors, you need to support all survivors, not just people who process their trauma like you or like you would expect them to. Everyone is different and that's valid." End quote. Vivziepop made this vague post on Threads in response to real-world rape survivors telling her that they are uncomfortable with someone who fetishizes rape working on a team as a storyboard artist. Ironically enough, not supporting all sexual assault survivors with this language. A few commenters below her post bring up some really good points in response to Vivziepop, so I'll read them aloud now. Quote, "That's crazy because this entire debate isn't even about whether or not SA victims are valid or not. It's about how you are allowing someone who is into non-con fetish art to work on your show. Even if they are a victim of SA. Silly little fact, not all coping mechanisms are good ones. Example, some people consider self-harm a coping mechanism. Does that make it a good one? No. And posting art depicting rape because it's their fetish isn't a good coping mechanism. Crazy, I know." End quote. This is a good point because it is very true that not all coping mechanisms are healthy, and depicting rape in a sexually glorified light is definitely a form of mental self-harm if you are a rape survivor. However, Raph isn't even a rape survivor, so that makes this even worse. It's not a coping mechanism for him. He is just quite literally making a mockery out of something so traumatizing for his own sexual gain. It shows a clear lack of empathy for real-world rape survivors. This commenter then continues, quote, "And if you don't draw it yourself, it's still very shitty of you to work with someone who draws things like that. Even if it's one team member, they represent your brand. And if you want non-con artists tied to your name, then have a fun time staying off Twitter." End quote. This also rings true. I personally want to create a short story that goes over the topic of child sexual assault and how it can affect one's brain negatively. I would not ever want someone on my team drawing a child getting raped in a positive light. I would fire them immediately as that does not align with my values. Vivziepop keeping Raph on her team tells me that she's perfectly okay with someone who fetishizes rape to represent her values, which, spoiler alert, she kind of already confirms with these social media interactions. Vivziepop's big brain response to this reasonable take from what I read before goes as follows. Quote, "I don't think you have any right to judge someone's way of coping with trauma when it is literally harming no one. The internet is not a safe place in regards to seeing things that make you uncomfortable. If you think seeing upsetting art is the same as self-harm, we literally do not see the world the same." End quote. Well, clearly not, because you've never been raped. Let's go over the first point that Viv brings up. It's literally harming no one. That's just blatantly false. Clearly, rape survivors feel hurt by this, including myself. Not to mention that humans connect to fiction, and that's because fiction both reflects and affects aspects of reality. For instance, there's a reason that having representation of queer people and people of colour is so important in media. It challenges the stereotypes that used to be used in the media everywhere. Another example is very basic misinformation that can easily be spread from media, such as cats drinking milk and rabbits eating carrots. Even though cats are lactose intolerant and rabbits should only have a little bit of carrot as a treat because it's high in sugar for them. When you are creating artwork, you require reference material from real life. When you are showing it publicly, you are sharing your worldview through it. I've talked to my psychologist about this subject. She has worked for years with rape survivors both young and old. She has also had to speak to rapists in jail, and she agrees that you need therapy if you are fantasizing about rape, as it is considered a harmful parody and a glorification of a real-world trauma. To add to my psychologist's credibility, she used to work closely with an organization called Bravehearts. Bravehearts is dedicated to teaching children about consent and helping child rape survivors like myself. A professional with over 10 years of experience disagrees with Vivziepop. As a public figure, you have a social responsibility to not inflict mental harm on people, but Raf's artwork quite literally feeds into the narrative of the victim secretly wanting it, also known as victim blaming or rape culture. It doesn't matter how much of a reach you may have, one person being affected with such a mentality is dangerous. This is also why I have never posted any of my more personal vent art myself, as it depicts self-harm as a valid way of escape due to the way those comics were written. I do not want to ever be the reason that someone hurts themselves. This is not to say that you can never depict dark subject matter in art. It's all about intention. If you post artwork of yourself looking distraught and showing something traumatic in a negative light with trigger warnings, then that's completely fine. However, when you are doing something like Raf, where you are fetishizing rape, that can only send a message of harm. There's a reason people get upset with Stone Toss, for instance. He promotes harmful ideas through his art, and this is no different. I also want to mention before someone brings up the topic of BDSM, something that I partake in, that a rape paraphilia isn't inherently a part of the BDSM community. BDSM is bondage, domination, sadism, and masochism amongst consenting adults, and safety is typically very much placed on a high pedestal in the BDSM community, a practice that involves what I just listed. Nowhere here is it mentioned that it inherently involves rape fantasies, or rape roleplays. The word you're looking for here is paraphilia, not BDSM, as BDSM is an umbrella term where the paraphilia is more precise. A lot of rape survivors can grow to become hypersexual and get into BDSM as a way of regaining power of their autonomy, the complete opposite of a rape paraphilia. This is not to say that a rape survivor can't form a rape paraphilia, but as I stated before, if a rape survivor indulges in that, it would be a form of mental self-harm due to the stereotypes it reinforces, the traumatic memories it could bring up, and could very much make the rape survivor feel more guilt over something that is completely not their fault. The next point I want to go over is, the internet is not a safe place in regards to seeing things that make you uncomfortable. People are fully aware of this. That doesn't make it right. This is just a completely useless statement. I mean, people quite literally sent Vivziepop cats being murdered in a blender. Is this morally okay because the internet's not a safe place in regards to seeing things that make you uncomfortable? I would like to think she would say no, but by her own logic, I guess it's hunky-dory. The next comment goes as follows, quote, "Child sexual assault survivor here. The person that you had do the scenes isn't a survivor and even has fetishes to related said topics. It's pretty distasteful, and if you actually cared about survivors depicting their struggles through art, you would have had an actual survivor do those scenes. Good luck," end quote. Vivziepop responds, "Believe it or not, the other crew involved in the episode are actual SA victims, so we literally did. This artist didn't control what happened in the episode. They didn't write it, they didn't direct it. A show is made by a team." Okay, so what's weird here is that Viv is not directly responding to what the CSA survivor has said, but has rather made a response beating around the bush. The problem this survivor has with her is that for this scene, she had someone with a rape fetish storyboard it. Raf may not have any story influence, but he still fetishizes rape. It's highly disrespectful to give such a sensitive job to a person like that, let alone to have him on her team in the first place. Now, I will concede that she very well may have had actual rape survivors on her team. That doesn't negate this criticism. She should have given this scene and role to someone else on her team who was a rape survivor. Before we go any further, I want to show you a screenshot shown on this thread's comments, one that proves that Raf isn't a rape survivor. Raf stated as follows, "Trigger warning, SA. I want to shout out all the people who responded to my retweet. You're all fucking superheroes and I admire each and every one of you. I am not a sexual assault victim myself, but I've dealt with years of repression and being controlled. Don't ever let anybody tell you how to fucking cope. Heart." End quote. Now, I know this video is more about Vivziepop than Raf, but I just want to respond here that his trauma is of course valid, but he has never been sexually assaulted or raped and therefore cannot speak for coping mechanisms that involve it. This includes his insensitive fetishization of rape. Now, back to Vivziepop. In this screenshot here, someone says to her, "This is your reaction to receiving backlash for quite literally letting a person with a rape fetish storyboard a graphic rape scene in a show that will be seen by thousands. If I were you, I would be embarrassed." Vivziepop responds, who is also a sexual assault survivor, "You people are leeches." And I hit that reply because it was self-righteous and I'm sick of it. I'm sorry, wow. People don't need to justify themselves to you, and there is a team of people who don't let an artist taste into a show they don't write or direct. Fuck off. End quote. So, if you were paying attention just a few seconds ago, Vivziepop just blatantly lied here. She's never gone out of her way to correct this lie or apologize for it. She would rather just sweep it under the rug and pretend it didn't happen. That's not the only instance she's done an oopsies and said nothing about it, but we would be here all day if I were to bring up all of her problems. Also, in case anyone was curious, this is the self-righteous comment she hid. Quote, "You hired someone with a rape and non-con fetish on your staff. At this point, you should receive backlash." End quote. I don't really need to add anything to this comment as it speaks for itself. Viv is just being childish and disrespectful at this point. Now, unfortunately for this section, I don't have the people who originally commented on Viv's thread post, but I was around when some of them did have their comments up. So you will have to take this with a grain of salt when I say I know some of the context behind these replies that she gives. Quote, "That's not all you're asking for. You want them to be fired, and if I had to fire every artist who shipped or was into something like this, it'd be insanely unethical to enforce. I don't share in what certain people like or ship, but I'll never shame them for something that is fictional. Also, it's really too late to say you're not starting beef. You've been really rude in your wording. This is the first reply that feels remotely civil." End quote. I can't tell you what the initial comments said, but it sounds like they were saying what a few others have said by now, that Viv should be held accountable for her hiring a person with a rape fetish on her team, and to fire them. This, in theory, shouldn't be something difficult to enforce. If I were to go to my old university for animation, or even TAFE for that matter, and go around and ask the students if they think it's morally okay to fetishize rape, I can guarantee you that 99% of them would say no. This tells me one of two things. Either A, Viv somehow managed to exclusively surround herself with people that glorify things like rape, pedophilia, and zoophilia through artwork, or B, she's overestimated the amount of people on her crew that indulge in these things to make a point. As for it being unethical to fire someone for having a rape fetish, I would like to know how on earth that would be the case. As I stated before, if I had a team member drawing child sexual assault material, I would fire them immediately, as I do not condone glorifying pedophilia in any way, fiction or reality, as I know the harms that it can bring to people both mentally and physically. It's the same reason you are meant to do background checks before hiring someone, because in theory, you wouldn't want someone who causes harm to be brought onto your team. Quote, "I actually tried to talk to you, but you avoided what I had to say because you don't actually care and just want to hear yourself talk." End quote. That sounds like projection. It's run its course, so yep, enjoy the block, you earned it being a brick wall. Also sounds like projection, given how she seems to be a brick wall when it comes to rape and sexual assault survivors criticizing her or bringing their concerns to her, but I digress. Go back to Twitter where your echo chamber will make you feel better about shaming other survivors because Cartoon Lady cringe. I'm genuinely curious if Vivziepop ever rereads what she publicly posts. Like, How can you be so unaware of how immature you come across as here? And when I say Vivziepop is acting immature and childish, I'm not using it as hyperbole. Just take a look at this clip of a 17-year-old basically spouting the same sentiments that Viv has.
Like, why am I allowed to draw fictional cutesy self-harm, but somebody isn't allowed to draw fictional cutesy pedophilia? It doesn't make sense.
I'm gonna have to read these ones from bottom to top as it only makes sense in that order, so please bear with me. Quote, "Because art they made or make isn't my business to police. As long as it's not illegal, I will never shame someone. Do I like all of it? No, absolutely not. But they don't influence the show past doing the boards that are directed by other people. A show is made by a large team. It's ridiculous to blame one artist they weren't in charge of." End quote. At this point, I feel like Viv is just purposely pretending to be dense. There is no way someone is legitimately this dense. Firstly, legality does not equate to morality. In some countries, you are allowed to kill gay people, but that doesn't make it morally right. In Australia, child sexual assault material in both fiction and in real form are illegal, so your point doesn't even have legs in all countries, as some countries have this type of content outlawed, as they should. And whilst yes, in your case you are not legally enforced to make sure your employees are not glorifying rape through art, if you want people to actually believe you when you say you care about rape survivors, you would do it out of the goodness of your heart, or for your reputation at the very least. This next one was in response to another survivor of child sexual assault talking to Vivziepop in a reasonable and non-aggressive fashion. Once again, I was there at the time to see this comment. So this is hearsay, but as far as I saw, this person was being beyond civil with their words before their comment vanished. Vivziepop says, quote, "Non-con art of fictional cartoon characters isn't illegal, lol, question mark, question mark, question mark," end quote. We've been over this. In some countries it is, and legality does not equate to morality. Quote, "If it was, a lot of animated shows would be fucked," end quote. That depends. Is Viv saying that any animated show depicting rape would be or just shows that fetishize or make fun of rape would be? Because these two statements are entirely separate conversations. If it's the first one, then I would agree with you. However, if it's the second one, then only shows like yours would be in trouble. The reason I say that is whilst Hazbin and Hell of a Boss don't fetishize rape, both have made fun of rape on 3 separate occasions. Which, trust me, we will be covering that later too in this video. Quote, "I've addressed why I hid this already. You care so much about it. Go look." End quote. I can't say for certain that Viv is responding to the same person here, but if she is, and if she did hide this child sexual assault survivor's comment, then that would explain why we can't see their comments here, and continues to make Viv look even worse. Quote, "Because kids are personal and do no harm." End quote. False. Whilst yes, kids are personal, not all of them are non-harmful. For instance, if someone has a stabbing kick and gets stabbed constantly, that would quite literally cause harm. This is just such a weird take. Viv is clearly not educated on kids, fetishes, or BDSM. If you want a video about the difference between kids and fetishes and what they are, I would highly recommend checking out Hannah Witten's video on it. Quote, "Because they are a sex worker who practices BDSM, which is a culture I respect and deals with a lot of this kind of kink." End quote. We've been over this already. BDSM does not equate to a rape paraphilia, and it doesn't equate to sex work either. I respect non-harmful kinks and fetishes even if they gross me out, such as people with a foot fetish. It's not my cup of tea, but it isn't inherently hurting anyone. Glorifying rape does hurt people. Also, this sentence could easily be chopped down to, "I respect my friend who glorifies rape more than I respect rape survivors," which is no surprise at this point. Quote, "Because it doesn't affect the show or anyone else working on it." End quote. I'd argue it does affect the show. I was completely fine watching the poison scene with Angel Dust until I learned an artist who has a rape paraphilia storyboarded it. Now it makes me feel sick to my stomach. You can never fully separate the art from the artist. This is why some people, for example, can't enjoy Harry Potter like they used to, because J.K. Rowling is transphobic and bigoted in other ways, and people can now not unsee that in her work. As for it not affecting anyone who is working on it, I don't believe that if there was someone on her team who was uncomfortable with this, would actually approach her about it, in fears of getting fired. So we'll never know if some members of her team are affected by this or not for certain. Quote, because it involves fictional characters and not real people, because a lot, ? End quote. Nothing to respond here, as I would just be repeating myself again. But man, if I were in the CSA survivor's position here, I'd feel pretty hurt with the lack of empathy and immaturity displayed in how Vivziepop responds here. I want to say this right now, that if you have been affected by Viv in any shape or form, that my heart does go out to you, and that I'm sorry that you have to deal with this kind of behaviour. Quote, you said it was illegal, I clarified it's not, why are you freaking out? End quote. They weren't freaking out, they were being civil. Viv just doesn't like people criticising her. Quote, also good, the way you're acting you're probably too young for it anyway. Don't watch, end quote. Says the woman in her 30s acting like a 13-year-old online. Also, if she's under the impression that this person was a child, which I doubt, why would she get into an internet conversation about a subject like this with them in the first place? Her responses are just so irresponsible in so many ways. Quote, if I'm being honest, you'll probably block me at the sight of my message, but I don't care. Having a rape fetish on your project that openly deals with sexual assault isn't morally right. Have a good night, Vivian, end quote. Vivian responds, quote, neither is speaking over sexual assault survivors and accusing the entire show of fetishization when the creator/director/writer of the episode that hasn't even been released doesn't tolerate positive depictions of abuse of any kind. Theirs are experiences outside of yours, go outside, end quote. What does Viv mean when she says that she doesn't tolerate positive depictions of abuse of any kind when she clearly does? Perhaps she means a different writer on her team. I mean, there are about 9 writers on this show. At what point did this person say to Viv that the entire show creator, director, and writer fetishizes rape? They said a rape fetish, not a million. They said it wasn't morally right to have that one person on board, not every single employee ever. Also, there Viv goes again lying about Raph being a sexual assault survivor and dismissing someone immaturely whilst the other person is being civil. The next commenter calls Viv out on lying about Raph, so this should be fun. Quote, bold of you to accuse people of speaking over sexual assault survivors when you straight up lied about Raph being one, as confirmed by Raph on Twitter, to cover up your ass. Or, he did experience sexual assault recently, but didn't talk about it on social media, and you just outed someone's trauma without their consent, which is even worse. Either way, the jig is up, my guy. No running off to a different platform will change the fact that you are a bad person, and that more and more people are becoming aware of it. End quote. This commenter hit it right on the nail, and even brings up some good points I didn't even think of. Vivziepop responds, the f***ing hoops you go through to make me out as a bad person when you are the ones shaming and speaking over victims of trauma for not responding the right way. I like how she had to change her language here from sexual assault survivor to victim of trauma, because she knows damn well she lied about Raph. Also, there's no hoops needing to be jumped through here. People can just easily scroll through her Twitter or threads and be able to see the proof in the pudding of her not being a good person. Quote, even now making these 2 scenarios where I'm bad just so you don't need to self-reflect for 2 seconds, end quote. They brought up those 2 scenarios because one of them has to be true, and neither of them make her look good. And as for the self-reflection comment, I smell projection once again. Just accept this situation isn't a f***ing big deal, and it's a stupid thing to be circle jerking before a cartoon scene is even f***ing out, end quote. The situation isn't a big deal to Viv because she doesn't care about rape survivors, nor has ever been through it herself, and seems to lack empathy towards those of us who have. Nobody is circle jerking. People are merely calling her out on having someone with a rape paraphilia on her show, where it is meant to shame rape, even though it doesn't, but we're not there yet. However, we are close to going over the scenes in her show as these comments lead us into it. Kind of ironic and hypocritical because you literally made a scene that Sir Pentious gets dragged by a group of demons to get gang raped, and you thought it was funny and made it for laughs. Keep in mind you based it off of an ex-friend who is indigenous, end quote. Now, I can't verify if the last part of that comment is true, but the first part definitely is. I would play the scene here, but I don't want to get copyright striked, so here's the summary. Sir Pentius, the snake character, goes into the club that has sex rooms in it. He tries to flirt with the Cyclops character, Cherry Bomb, with the rules of 3 in comedy. Basically, you tell the same joke 3 times with slight changes being made each time, and then the last joke is meant to be the big punchline. Sir Pentius goes something like this: "May I buy you a drink?" Cherry asks why, and he says because he's buying everyone a drink, and the crowd in the club cheers. Another similar question and answer happens like that before the final joke, the big funny. "Miss Bomb, would you like to do a sex with me?" "Why would I have sex with you?" "Because I'm having sex with everybody here." And with that, Sir Pentius gets dragged off by a crowd of people who go to gang rape him as he is in clear distress and does not give consent here. People are meant to find this funny. I certainly wasn't laughing, and I wasn't alone. Quote, "And there was a scene in Hell of a Boss where Moxie also gets raped by a group of demons. Both of these scenes are made for laughs, yet the song Poison is meant to be taken seriously." End quote. It is true that Moxie gets hurt by a group of demons sexually. Whether it is classified as sexual assault or rape would be up to interpretation, but either way, it's still really bad. The scene always made me feel uncomfortable even when I used to be a fan of Vivziepop, but I so desperately wanted to believe that Viv was a good person and that maybe she was just ignorant or something. And yes, this scene was also meant to be played for a laugh, as well as another scene in Hell of a Boss where Stella talks about Stolas being horrible in bed and says, "He just lays there staring at the ceiling and I have to do all the work." Which, if you don't know, someone not responding during sex is a clear sign that they are disassociating. I would know as I have dissociated many times before. It hurts. Instead of Stolas having an expression of trauma, he instead makes a silly bird noise and scowls as if she was just insulting his sensibility rather than admitting to everyone that she was Stolas. It's scenes like this that prove to me that Viv doesn't understand consent, nor cares about either subject in any meaningful way. I honestly believe that Viv only made Angel Dust a rape victim because she wanted a reason for her story to appear deep, dark, and angsty. But it's all surface level and filled with stereotypes and unintentional, at least I hope, victim blaming. Watch the loser baby scene at face value without Viv telling you what it's actually meant to be about, and you'll see what I mean. In fact, to give an example of the benefit of the doubt I gave Viv, when Has Been first dropped and I saw the Sir Pentius scene, I thought to myself that because she wrote the script a long time ago, she probably doesn't find rape funny anymore. But given that in 2024 she's liked this tweet, she definitely still thinks rape jokes are funny. I'd also like to interject here that Viv defending rape being fetishized in 2024 because it's just fiction means her apology for her artwork from a while back is completely null and void. Of course, I won't be showing that artwork here for obvious reasons, but if you really want proof, you can look it up yourself. It involves snakes, so you have been warned. At the end of the day, rape is horrible regardless of who the victim is. A child, an adult, an animal, it's all equally as bad as one another. And to make artwork depicting it in a glorified or light is just plain insensitive to anyone who has gone through it. There was a time I had hoped that Viv could grow and change as a person, but now that hope is completely gone. All that I can hope is that people see this video and her behaviour and choose to no longer support her. Instead, support organisations like Bravehearts, non-official merch, and content creators who are rape and sexual assault survivors, people who actually care. With that all said, I'm going to get a little bit more personal now about how Viv having Raph on her team affected me. As you may already know, I used to be a big fan of Vivian Medrano's work. Her JJ animation was the reason I got into animation in the first place. Because of that, she was what I would have called a personal inspiration and hero. I bought many of her pins, a few shirts, and other bits and bobs because at the time I liked her work and wanted to support her. When I found out that Viv doesn't care about rape survivors, I went through a depressive episode. All of the merch hanging around my room would bring up flashbacks of my rape when I was a child. I found myself panicking and crying at just the sight of her works or related works. I talked to my psychologist about it and asked her if I was overreacting, and she said not only that I wasn't, but that she agrees that Viv is not a good person. Since then, I've put most of her merch away in a box and I plan on selling it on eBay later down the track. The remaining pins I do have of things related to her are ones that make me feel safe. Charlie and Vaggie for sapphic representation, Sally Mae for trans body positivity, Vizarozzi for representation of a healthy relationship, Stolas and Octavia for representation of a caring father, fan pins from Etsy sellers who have been kind to me, and my own pins because I made them. That's all I'm keeping. From now on, there will be no more purchases of anything Vivziepop related, even if it's fan art, as I never want to experience these panic attacks again. As for the pins I have made and are still selling, after the Cherry Bomb, Fizzarolli, and Beelzebub pins are sold, I will not be making any more. I'm sorry if this disappoints anyone, but it's just too traumatic for me to handle. As for what I plan on doing now, whilst I'll still make fan art for different things, I am now going to be steering slowly towards more original content behind the scenes. However, do expect a lot of Studio Ghibli speed paints in the near future, as I'm working on something big with that. I'll stop babbling now. If you've watched this video all the way to the end, thank you, I appreciate your time. I promise my other videos won't be as heavy as this, I just needed to get this off my chest as I wasn't seeing anyone else go into depth like I have with this video. Make sure to drink water, go to the bathroom, eat, unclench your jaw, and take a moment to breathe. This has been Akira Halloran, and I'll see you next time.